Welcome to another Friday special edition of Legend of the Superstition Mountains. This week, something a bit different because we've been trying to keep every Friday a little something different. We were out in the mountains a little for chasing legends, and then we went and visited with Bob's Shoes. We gave you some Clay Worth stuff. This week, we're going to talk about a project that's been going on for about a year now. It's been the preservation of old film footage. Now, we realized, and there's a deterioration factor involved because you can't preserve a lot of the old 8mm, 16mm film over time. What will happen is, even no matter how you store it, eventually you'll notice you pick up the lid and you'll start to smell a vinegar smell. That's because it's just the deterioration of the film. It will fade. If you have a videotape, old VCR videotape that you filmed in 1990 and you think it looked great, well, you're going to find, if you haven't looked at it in 30 years, 32 years now, well, you're going to find it's pretty faded and seems real fuzzy, and it's just there's a deterioration. Plus the quality of what we have filming now is definitely upscaled, but everything deteriorates that's on film, that's on tape, and each time you play it, there's a further deterioration. So what I started to do is start trying to save and digitally preserve everything I could film-wise, anything that's on a tape. We started with the 8mm project, 8 and Super 8, which the difference is 8mm is kind of normal and Super 8 usually has some sound. And there's not a lot of Super 8 out there. And one of the unfortunate aspects we ran into early on was there was some stuff from the 40s, but as soon as I went to open the can, I could smell it. And it literally just smelled like I'd opened a bottle of vinegar. And then what happens is it's very brittle, but it also becomes like one ball. You can't even separate the frames. So it was ruined. Very unfortunate, because it would have been cool to see what was on those from the 40s. But there's a lot of stuff from the 50s and 60s, and then some stuff from the 70s I've been able to preserve. Now the process is a frame-by-frame sequence. It's not something you just like some little gimmicky thing. It actually takes a second or two for each frame to be preserved. And then what I would do is, there was a lot of bad splices and a lot of problems with the material. But then what I would do is I would have a little small air duster. And what I was trying to do is dust and clean the film as it went in. Wiping the film would cause even more problems because we'd be further scratching it and possibly fading it. And most of this material is very faded. It's actually in really good condition for stuff that just sat around. But yeah, I got it as good as I could. But the idea is, once you digitally process this and have it preserved digitally, I don't have the means, but someone would be able to enhance it or do something with that digital footage, because now we've preserved that. And it's been not just hours, it's been hundreds of hours of this. So you can imagine how much time it takes in days, weeks, months. Just a reel of film can take forever, because it's click, frame, click, frame, click, frame. And it was piles of stuff. I did not know what was on most of the stuff. There was a lot of Superstition Mountains stuff that I was able to preserve. And that was very cool. It's not the kind of stuff you're going to sit back and go, oh, this is like that really cool drone footage and the mountains look beautiful. The mountains look similar. They look a little cleaner than what you'd see today, because the cattle had been back in there in time. So while we've had the drought, there's a lot of canyons that are overgrown with cat claw and a lot of other material. So it's changed significantly. It's actually more choked and filled with brush and stuff than it probably was then. But then there's less trees and certain other, things in the desert that have changed because of the drought. It's not colorized. We didn't do anything to enhance it. It's just what it is. We don't always know who the people are coming into frame. One of the other problems and aspects we have, there's not a lot of people around to identify who the people might have been. And we're also talking about someone, in most cases now at this point, when we're looking at something around 1960, you're talking something 60 years ago, and someone's trying to remember what someone looked like 60 years ago. We did get some great stuff on Chuck Ayler, and there's a few other people might be identified, but it's very rare that you can kind of pinpoint down who some people are. Chuck Ayler was very specific. One, it was in Boulder Canyon at his house, and it had his burrows, but secondly, Chuck had a very prominent facial structure. So and he dressed a certain way, and so he was easy to pick out. But it was a preservation project because one of the things we wanted to do moving forward, and we're continuing to do, and what takes us so long is we take all this process. We wanted to build up an archive of this stuff to put it out there and have a website or something where this stuff was just for anyone to watch. Now, it was very boring to me because it was frame by frame by frame, and then after I got it done, I wanted to go back through and see what I got. There was a lot of stops and starts where the film would split, and I would start it over and splice and work with it. People didn't always splice film really nicely, so I was trying to splice as best I could, and there was some jumps and some odd things. These were not professional photographers or cameramen, and by no means. It was some guy that got a camera, and sometimes the pans are really difficult and stuff. But again, it was something preserving history, something that probably in a lot of cases may not have been seen for 30, 40, 50 years. And then in the other cases was just kind of lost to time. Nobody was going to ever see it again. It was going to deteriorate, was going to become nothing. And so we continue the archive project. And the idea is, again, to save it for everybody and put it out there. As people notice, I don't try to put copyrights on stuff and do stuff like that because I want people to share it and people to enjoy it and the history and stuff, because I don't consider it mine. I don't know sometimes whose it is. We were able to capture some stuff definitely from the 50s of people traveling through the reservations, and so some very cool footage there. We were able to capture some stuff of very brief. It was just kind of out of the blue, like a clip. I think is about a minute and a half of just at the Dawn's Trek sometime in the 50s. So it was very cool because it was in color. It was suddenly there, we see it, and then it was gone. So they must not have been impressed very much, because then it became about filming. There was a lot of filming of people's pets. So, and you have to sit through it because you never know what we're going to jump to next, because it suddenly gets interspersed with other things. So again, the preservation of that stuff is very, very important. I like to share that, and part of the idea of the website too was documents, photographs, and stuff, and put the correct names. Unfortunately, more in social media than YouTube, but it happens in YouTube too, is generally, and I consider YouTube more of video film grade and not so much social media. Because when I refer to social media, I'm usually referring to Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, that type of thing. Not so much YouTube, even though I do know it falls into that category. And the reasoning is people tend to make up things. Anybody that's watched all of our stuff that we've done over time, and as you're watching this, I'm making sure, I wish I could give credit to who did this. There was nothing labeled on any of the canisters. Some of them might say Superstition Mountains, and that was it. Sometimes I just watched it and then I had to realize, oh, this is in the Superstitions, because I could identify certain mountains, peaks, certain canyons. I always like to give credit where credit's due. When we do the Chasing Legends stuff, you always hear me and I reference books and I tout the books and I tell you the books. And we have, I know, a number of different videos telling you, different books to buy when new releases come out. I always want to give a nod and credit to the people that came before me or wrote certain things, or where my information can come from. When it's stuff I've dug out and researched myself, that's fine. But I always want to attribute it where it belongs, because people deserve credit for that. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people that like to basically plagiarize and then paraphrase and think that almost stands original, and then put their own ideas into the situation, acting like it's really solid research. And unfortunately, what that does is it taints the waters. There's a lot of that happens, and those people are basically frauds. And it's really sad, because they're not touting this as, this is my opinion or this is my theory on this. They're putting that theory interspersed with someone else's words. And recently there was some stuff posted that was literally, I just watched, well, they just basically rewrote stuff from someone else's book, and then they just basically made sure everybody thought they wrote it, and they didn't. And I was kind of disappointed in it and in the individual, because I'm thinking, it didn't really matter. You're just sharing with people something that's maybe not readily available at the time. and they would find interesting, but I never understand what it is. You're not making anything off of it. Is it just satisfying your ego or some sort of weird thing? And I don't know what that is. I don't pretend to be an expert when these people think they are. But at the same token, I consider myself knowledgeable and always becoming more knowledgeable. I don't know if I'll ever attain the amount of knowledge that a number of people like Tom Collenborn or Clay Worster or Ron Feldman and the time they've put in the mountains. I've gotten pretty good. You know, I think I could say, you know, people like myself and Jesse Feldman, a lot of us have put a lot of time into it, but we don't have the depth and the experience some of these other guys did, because we didn't. One thing we're lacking, and while I can say I grew up in it in the 70s, I wasn't there in the 60s for it when there was when those heydays happened, which is another thing these films definitely capture to some extent, and also goes on, is people always act like there was not a lot of Dutch hunting before Adolph Ruth. There were a lot of people in the mountains. There were a lot of groups searching for the Lost Dutchman Mine. It wasn't as well known. There were no books written and so forth, so we tend to kind of overlook that part. The 50s, 60s, and 70s were definitely a heyday, and it was everybody and the brother. So it wasn't people just out filming in the mountains, walking around with an 8mm camera. They were Dutch hunting, and whether they were Dutch hunting coming out of state for a week into the mountains or they were doing it on regular trips, these people put a lot of time and effort into this stuff. And it was kind of that thrill being back out there, the mystery, that, you know, the Coronado's children, definitely. And that thing that's inside most all of us, and some people, definitely in the 60s, 70s, people were reacting to it and trying to do something with it. And I think one of the increases we saw in the 70s and 80s, and even a bit in the 90s, even though 1980s, the change in prospecting and mining claims and the superstitions did alter things, was once people privately could go and own and sell gold themselves, that kind of changed the framework a little bit too for people, because they realize, oh, I can go out and get this and I don't have to turn it in immediately or anything like that, or worry about hiding it. We don't have any of those kind of problems. But these films are a testament to the times and efforts. Now, I wish there was a way with some of these people that I could show some of this footage too. And there was one gentleman that I knew helped and was good with Chuck Ayler, named Dick Walp, and I tried to get a hold of Dick, and I wasn't able to, and I continue to, because I know he may not be able to see clearly the footage and so forth, but I'd like to get some of the stories behind it. There's a number of people he may have known who were in the footage, and he was someone I knew was right in the area at that physical time. I haven't shown it to Clay Worst, and I will get it to Clay one day to let Clay kind of go through it. Brian Lickman, who did work with Chuck Ayler, watched it. Brian couldn't figure out, nobody seemed recognizable other than Chuck. So to Brian. So we're trying to always put names with some of these faces. If you had a relative in the mountains or something, you know, hey, it'd be really cool. So the idea is preserving this stuff for everybody to see. And like I said, I don't like to always kind of push and pull on stuff, but you know, you want to change that mindset of the Dutch hunters, which I've always said. Tom Collenborn, Bob Corbett, Ron Feldman, Bob Shoes, Jim Hatt, even Robert Kessler. These gentlemen have had very successful lives, been good businessmen, taking care of their families. And I think for a long time, a lot of guys had that perception of, well, Dutch hunters is kind of a looked down upon thing because of the Crazy Jakes, the Bob Wards, and a lot of the bad publicity that came out of the 70s and 80s and so forth. And it's a shame, because Larry Hedrick always tells me he doesn't consider himself a Dutch hunter. And that's a shame, because Larry is a Dutch hunter. He maybe tries to go in denial about it. He was very good friends with Tom Collenborn. He spent a lot of time in the mountains. I know he considers himself more a historian, but you can't tell me he was spending all that time in the mountains and not hoping or looking for the Lost Dutchman Mine. You know, those guys tend to want to, when they want to be like the historian, they act like they weren't doing that, and they were. And you know, I'm trying to change that mindset. Bob Corbin was the former state attorney general of the state of Arizona. He was the president of the NRA, and he was a Dutch hunter. And I think Bob would freely admit it. Well, I don't see that as an unsuccessful story or a bad person to have that designation. So one of the things through the rendezvous and this kind of stuff is we're trying to put it out there, show like, hey, there's a lot of guys had great times, great relationships, a lot of good people. Not everybody went in the mountains, died in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. A lot of people survived. There was a lot of wildness, a lot of bad things happened. But we want to always kind of preserve the whole history of it. And while kind of the negative stuff and some of that stuff gets more kind of tied into everything, and it's better for storytelling, I think there's always can be the positive stuff. So, and I know it's kind of like, there's no audio on all this, so you're just kind of listening to me drone on about this kind of stuff. But preserving this stuff and working with people who are like-minded and stuff like that is very, very important to me. It's one of the things I hate and why you don't see me write stuff. I wrote a number of articles for the Superstition Mountain Journal. I saw what was going in, the problems with some of the articles and so forth and the information, and I felt there was being certain favoritisms, and I didn't really want the material I was doing, that I was working so hard to make sure it was point on correct and everything was attributed to the proper people. And then I saw some of the nonsense that was happening, and there was a lot of good people that wrote articles for that, but there was some nonsense, and then I felt bad because I thought, I don't want to go back and reflect on that and do that. So there was 3 or 4 things I spent a lot of time on. One of them was I spent time with Nancy McCullough and Ken McCullough, but definitely Nancy, and learning about the Barkley family and Gus Barkley, Tex Barkley, and Bill Barkley, her father, and kind of like more the day-to-day routines and growing up in the family and stuff like that, kind of more on a personal level, not the historic, like the Dutch hunting stuff. And it was really nice because I wanted to portray and have something that talked about the people and their personalities and what they were like when nobody was around and there was no Dutch hunting talk, and it was just working every day on the ranch and going to school and coming home to mom and dad and that kind of thing. And I really cherished getting to spend the time with her and talking about that, because I was able to envision the stories when she was, at length telling me stories about the time she would go and visit with her grandfather and her and Tex Barkley play cards, and she said he'd let me win, and she said even at that age I knew, and all. And she talked about the sense of humor of people, and you could tell there was a bit of hurt and pain because we forget these are very real people. We forget Julia Thomas Reinhardt, Patrash Herman Patrash, and Tex Barkley, Brownie Holmes were very real people, and they worked very hard in their lives. And we tend to kind of like to want to embellish and do things. One of the things is with the Adolph Ruth's story that gets so out of hand is people forget Brownie Holmes was alive and did a lot of interviews, and he talked, and people didn't talk to him necessarily about Dutch hunting or what he was looking for, clues. They would talk about things happen. He was actually an eyewitness who was at the Quarter Circle U, and he didn't really sit around and hang around Adolph Ruth, but he saw him, he observed him, he stayed there a couple nights while Ruth was there, and he talked quite a bit about what happened during those circumstances. But people will portray an alternative history. And the problem is you had someone that was actually there, and we know was there, and talking, and he wasn't embellishing anything. He wasn't making up incredible stories or stuff or anything like that. It was very just kind of average, just kind of plain. But I always find it kind of like annoying when people want to just create conspiracy theories about a lot of things, when you had people that were working very hard, living day to day in their lives, living a pretty hard life for the most part. And there was a circumstance and something that happened in a given situation, and they put themselves out there and worked very hard to try to find this gentleman, and who had no business being in the mountains, that they basically realized they were trying to prevent from going in the mountains because they didn't think he'd last a day or two on his own, just health-wise. And then something happens to him, and then it becomes the murder conspiracies and the body movements and all this. And the people that do that, I just kind of always feel kind of bad because they're playing the entertainment card, and I don't like that. That's why doing this kind of thing and showing these films and stuff is showing stuff it can be said to be boring, and I could be just a talking head right now for the most part, going on about nothing over top of a film footage. But the idea is, by preserving this stuff, we're preserving something of historic value. And that's what we're supposed to be doing, is taking this stuff and then putting it out there. We're supposed to be making transcripts of interviews and not trying to talk about, read between the lines, or in some cases, as some people, completely falsifying interviews and transcripts and material that never existed. I know there was several times people talked about taped recordings of several people and, Dutch hunters and stuff. And I won't say the people's names or the people supposedly these things were by, but I don't think they ever existed. I think they just was a way for them to work in stories and work in their theories and act like their theories were correct. Which the problem, again, is you want to know how you lose a mine? Keep introducing things that you know aren't true, but you think stick with your theory to help make people believe in your theory. And then eventually they become this part of the story itself. And you can't separate these things anymore. So preserving this type of history and these films and putting this stuff out here unedited to some extent, and this is just a taste of it, because I don't think you want to sit here with me talking for 4.5 hours about 8mm footage of some guy just panning through the mountains and up and down and doing that. But the idea is we're preserving that, and it's going to continue. We're going to continue doing as much film as we can, as long as we can, and anything we can find, because I continue to try to search it out. If you got something you want to preserve it, and you don't want to do it yourself, I would be more than happy. I'll do it for free. My only request is if I do it, you'll get a copy. There's no problem. But I want to make sure I make a copy that can go to the Historic Society, so that the Historical Society or someone has it to preserve, so we can have it on hand and that it can be utilized and preserved for history. So if you got something in the Superstition Mountains, you got that kind of stuff, contact me, because you can get it to me. I will do it. I will get you a copy, and you'll have a copy to watch, because most people don't have old film projectors. I actually do, but I'm copying it digitally through a machine, and I don't have a problem with doing it and then getting someone a copy and then making sure the Historical Society gets one. And then, with someone's permission, if it's private family footage, if they don't mind, I'd like to just be able to share this stuff, because I think as much as you get, it's nice for just other people to enjoy it and stuff, because that's why people did it, for people to watch it. So we're not making anything off of it in that point. The idea is to put it out there for everybody to see and kind of just enjoy, so we can kind of look back on things. So that's kind of where we're at. That's kind of what all this is about. So you're getting a taste of it. It's not pretty. It's not beautiful. It's kind of very unique and neat, because what you're seeing right now is stuff that outside of myself and possibly Trevor, nobody's seen in a long, long time. And it's been dusted off, preserved now digitally, and we're going to continue that. And in continuing some of this, like this here, we preserve some of Chuck Ayler. We will be preserving a number of other Dutch hunters that could be forgotten. They could just be some photographs available online or something, but we're going to try to preserve more and more of these individuals. And then the other ideas, as we continue to do interviews with the film that will be happening called Sunset, once that's done, the transcripts will be available for all the interviews, the complete interviews, which you have to understand, 12, 14 people, a couple hours each. There's a lot of material there that's not going to be used, but we'll make sure those transcripts go in and people will be able to get them and go through them and read them. It's not about looking for the Lost Dutchman Mine. It's about the people and their experiences of the mountains and why they're there. But definitely when we get that trailer up and get some of that, people will see what that's going to be about. And I think people are going to really enjoy it, because from what I've seen now in the rough cuts, and now we're getting down to the final cuts, that film in itself is very, very good. We're trying to make it not just entertaining, but make it so you can sit right through it. And there's not a lull. It just kind of moves smoothly through. And we're trying to represent Dutch hunting and the Lost Dutchman Mine and Jacob Waltz and that story in a unique way. I think we're at the point where it's the final edits and the B-roll is getting popped in. There's some narration to do, but primarily we're almost down to just me working on the music, which I have almost ready to go. So that should be going. Hopefully it'll be in film festivals. There'll be some private screenings. There'll be some material from that we can share with people. So and everybody should look forward to that. That being said, of course, again, we're on Friday, and we're going to leave on out of here. Remember to pick up any of the books by any of my good friends. I know the Superstition Mountain Museum has most everyone's books. There's some good stuff. Tom Collenborn, Ride Through Time, and I think his Act for Justice novels even down there are available. But there's some good stuff. Jesse Feldman's new book, a bunch of Ron's books are down there. Jack Sanfelice, Jack Carlson, Elizabeth Stewart, lots of copies of Superstition Mountains, hiking trails east and west, and so forth. So go down, pick up some of that stuff. There's, when you go in the door on the left, the Superstition Mountain Journal. There's discs of, I think there's 3 different discs through the 3 different volumes that were done. I know Paul Shimmick had to do that, so I want to give him credit because I think he did a lot for preserving those, which kind of spurred me on an idea of trying to do more of that. And I think that was an idea all of us had. It just is so time consuming. It's hard for everybody to take the big lead and digitize and make everything. But that's available there where you can get that and see all the stuff that's in the journals. I think there is some other things of Tom's in there and some other stuff. And there's always some, there used to be DVDs of Clay Worst and a number of other people. I don't even know if those are available anymore. And if I catch up some of that stuff and get permission, we'll put some of that out there, because if they're not going to reproduce those and sell those anymore, it would be good, again, for us to kind of have a website that's a conglomeration of not having to pay for it. We'll let them, sponsors or whatever else, kind of deal with that kind of thing to keep the website up. But it would be nice to have a site where it had a lot of this information and documents and letters and things that we could put out there that allowed people to kind of see archival material and so forth. So that's kind of the future, and a lot to do on that. So that's one of those things that hangs us up, is all these other things going into play and interplaying. And plus, we're going into this weekend on triple digits, believe it or not. So thanks for joining us this week. It's always great to do these things on Friday, and definitely good to run my mouth with more freedom and more freely than I generally get to in these stories, because usually I'm telling a story. Today I got to talk my mind and speak my mind a little, which is a bit of a relief. So, and I could do this all day. I do it at the Rendezvous for 3 days. But anyways, thanks for joining us again. Look out for us at the Rendezvous this year. I think it's the 6th, 7th, and 8th, I think, is it? 5th, 6th, 7th, whatever, that weekend after Halloween in November. But yeah, just look forward to joining us there at the Don's Camp. And there's just not a lot else going to happen throughout this summer as we just pull another number of different projects together and so forth. But thanks for joining us. Thanks for supporting us. And thank you so much for continuing to watch us. Please hit the subscribe, hit the notification bell. You can go to the About section. You know what's there. I don't have to tell you. Leave a comment. You know, we always like the comments. A lot of times it's just thanking us for putting this stuff up, and we do appreciate it. We always check them out. We hit that little like thing because we want you to know that we're paying attention, all right? So until the next time, I'm Wayne Tuttle. You definitely are not, because if you've been listening to me, you'd know if it was you, you would be looking at yourself. So until the next time, thank you for joining us on this special edition of Legend of the Superstition Mountains.